I like to call it a splatter-tacular comic, right? So there's going to be lots of action, lots of mayhem. If I had to choose only one color to print this book in, it would probably be red. Instead, it's going to be a full color extravaganza, and the humor will be in the action and in the absurd lengths that our characters go to try and survive this one hellacious night. I'm Patrick Lugo, the creator of Undead Kungfu Ghost Killer, and you can find me at ukgk.site or plugoarts.com. You have been watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined today by a returning guest. It has been a few years since he was last on the show, and far be it from me to never deny this particular guest to be on our show because he's such a wonderful person to chat with. His work from A Tiger's Tale as well as his upcoming new, amazing, beautiful book, starting the spooky season off in October, Undead Kungfu Ghost Killer. We're joined by the ever-talented Patrick Lugo. How are you doing today?
Hello, Kurt. I'm so glad to be here. It's really been too long since we've chatted.
I know I had to look back. It's been at least a year or two for sure. And I've been seeing you on social media. I've been seeing you doing the promotion for this upcoming amazing book. But for those that don't know anything about yourself as a creative person, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking today.
Well, I'm Patrick Lugo. I'm a New York born artist who's lived half his life in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've done comics, I've done record album covers, and most people will probably know my work from the iconic Kung Fu magazine, where I spent more decades than I will admit to as their art director.
And of course, we're talking about Undead Kung Fu Ghost Killer. It's a mouthful, but it is a beautiful book. It has your classic, amazing style with watercolors and all those amazing things that we don't see in comics these days. It is truly your own unique style. What is the origin story of Undead Kung Fu Ghost Killer?
Undead Kung Fu Ghost Killer, or as I like to shorten it to UKGK, is like my other work, A Tiger's Tale. It's a meticulously researched deep dive into Kung Fu folklore. So our titular hero, who I call Zong Q, is actually based on a Chinese folk deity named Zong Kui, who is probably the original Ghostbuster. His story goes back way back into Chinese history, and he's known as, the king of ghosts. His story is a story of a noble warrior who was rejected in his lifetime, but then he spent his afterlife protecting the emperor and mortals from the evils of the undead realm. And so I just had to kind of take that bit of folklore and expand it out with my more modern sensibilities.
I love that. Talk to us about the Chinese folklore that you had to research when it came to this particular series. What was the first notice or the first story that you came across with this particular character?
I discovered this character by happenstance when I was first, starting my career working for Kung Fu magazine, and we had received some sample scrolls, like your traditional Kung Fu calligraphy in scroll form. And one of them was an illustration of this character, and he really struck me by his look, right? His wild eyes and bushy beard. Why would I be attracted to wild eyes and bushy beards, you might wonder? But then he was also surrounded by bats, and being, a lifelong comic aficionado, I kind of like noticed the bats, and I was like, oh, here's a kung fu hero who also has bats. Right now, there's a whole other lore about how in Chinese bats equate to good luck. It has to do with the character that they're written in, and the sound fu, which you use to pronounce bat, also equates to luck. So that kind of led me down the trail of who's this character who has bats as companions and why is he lucky. And then that led to the story of him being like a candidate for the Imperial Guard who was rejected because he was too ugly, right? The vanity of the emperor at the time did not, let the emperor accept this particular warrior into his court. And so, dejected, Zhong Kui died unknown, but his nobility was recognized in the afterlife, which led to, multiple stories of him conquering ghosts. And it's a recurring theme, like throughout Chinese literature. There have been multiple tellings of this character's adventures, like over the various dynasties where he's evolved. And it's even become a bit of a like a folk practice where people will hang out illustrations of him as a good luck charm, right? So like you might find a painting of Zhong Kui hanging up beside the back door to keep any ghosts from entering through the back door. So that combination of folklore and artwork with like a heroic, a super heroic or supernatural heroic storyline just was really something that kind of stayed with me.
Well, it goes to show you that tales like this or ghost stories transcend nationalities, transcends countries, transcends dynasties in this particular case. I find it amazing that this is new to me. This is new to probably a lot of people who don't really follow the culture or that particular character. I'm glad you're bringing this particular character to life here. The rejection for being ugly, that kind of struck me as odd. Why is he so focused on fighting the undead? Why is that his core motivation for being?
Well, I mean, this is where, I can talk more about motivation with regards to my fictional take of the character as opposed to my research of the lore, right? And it's always that interesting thing that's part of where I've kind of made a name for myself is that's what Tiger's Tail was about, right? Absorbing the lore and then trying to fictionalize it to make it more digestible. So within this case, right, it was a matter of honor. This warrior, devoted his, I like to describe it this way. He spent a lifetime in training so that he can spend his afterlife in combat. And so I wanted to take a look at what it would be like if all hell breaks loose. And so we could imagine a kung fu take on a zombie apocalypse where these monsters are terrorizing the local villagers and only another supernatural being can stop them. So this is Zhang Qiu's chance to fulfill his destiny, right? He was never in his life, he was never able to fulfill the destiny of being a hero and a protector. So in his afterlife, there's no one that's better qualified or better motivated to do just that.
So this is a spin-off of A Tiger's Tale. What was the biggest lesson you took from A Tiger's Tale, and how did you apply it to this particular book?
A Tiger's Tale was a huge undertaking, right? 2 volumes, more than 200 pages in length, huge comic pages. I tried to capture the entirety of martial arts mythology in one story, and that was just overly ambitious. I think I crafted a good story, and I'm proud of the work that I did, but it was just massive conceptually. This was a story of tigers and dragons and how they interface with the universe as a whole. So with Zhang Qiu, or with Undead Kungfu Ghost Killer, I wanted to really bring it down to just the on the ground action of one night where all hell breaks loose and only Zhang Qiu can, save the day or save the night, or both. I mean, only Zhang Qiu's actions are there to help those few victims who have a hope of surviving.
The fact that you have a beautiful watercolor style that is unique to your own particular brand when it comes to your comics and your amazing work in general, the tone, finding that visual tone for this particular series, you did a more colorful approach to A Tiger's Tale. You definitely went at a darker tone, obviously necessary for Undead Kung Fu Ghost Killer. Why was that, and are you happy with the visual tone that you've achieved?
I am having a great time with really trying to take my style of, let's call it, improvised brushstrokes to a new level. One Some of the feedback that I've gotten from colleagues about this particular project is them describing like they really fell into a painting. So a lot of my brush work and that watercolor quality that informs both the Tiger's Tail and this project are informed by the traditional Chinese calligraphy that I've dabbled in, but I've had the good fortune of meeting great masters of that particular art form, enough to inspire me to take my hand at it. So I really want Undead Kung Fu Ghost Killer to feel like you're falling into a painting, kind of to try and carry over that same theme I was describing earlier with the magic of the mythical character Zhong Kuai being associated with his image, right? If you hang up an image of this ghost killer, you'll be protected from ghosts. So I wanted to have the artwork be very tactile, and I wanted you to feel the brushstrokes as they depicted the action in the comic.
I think that's also something that I find interesting is you're taking Chinese mythology, Chinese folklore, and you're bringing it to life with this amazing comic series. But from a North American audience, obviously there's a huge difference between what we're used to in terms of vampires and werewolves and everything like that versus the ghosts and the folklore of the Chinese culture. Can you talk on that? Because I find that really fascinating.
It's such a huge subject, and it's something that I've always just found myself delving into more and more. The average person, if they've read manga especially, will probably recognize the Japanese term yokai. In China, it's pronounced yaoguai, right? But the characters that they are written in are the same characters. It's just that difference in pronunciation. But the concept, they overlap because it's the creatures that are being described are supernatural in ways that kind of are influenced by like Taoist philosophy and Buddhist philosophy as well. So there's kind of a strong connection to nature, but that connection can also, reveal a dark and shadowy side. Let me give you an example, Kurt. So when we think of monsters in Europe, what's more iconic than the vampire, right? The blood-sucking uh, creature of the undead. In Asia, right, a yaoguai that would be similar is called a jiangshi. And those creatures, rather than absorbing blood, these are undead monsters that will absorb the life force of those people around them. And so when they rise from their tombs, rigor mortis will stiffen them. So rather than turning into a bat, which as I've mentioned earlier, that's a symbol of good luck, the Jiangshi, they hop around, you know, but as they grow more powerful, those hops can be longer and higher until eventually these creatures can fly. So this would be an example of one of the yaoguai that we encounter in issue 1 of Undead Kung Fu Ghost Killer.
Because you have such a long history to work with and a long folklore history as well too when it comes to this series, how deep are you going to go with it? Are you going to go to the same lengths that you did with the Tiger's Tail, or are you going to be a little more selective with the supernatural forces that come into play?
Well, for this issue, this is an issue 1, so I'm going to kind of keep this pretty self-contained. We can imagine this is like the night that all hell breaks loose, right? And that's how the story starts. But whereas with A Tiger's Tail, I spent hundreds of pages like traveling the world with those characters and, having them visit dragons and all sorts of other like mythical creatures. For this story, I want to just focus on the action of those characters that are going to try and survive a night when, the denizens of the underworld, are released and, wreak havoc on the mundane world as we understand it.
Now, it's not all just horror, though. You're going to lighten the mood, I'm sure, a bit with like little comedic moments. Like, you're not just going to go straight into the heart of the folklore. You're going to try to alleviate things, right?
I like to call it a splatter-tacular comic, right? So there's going to be lots of action, lots of mayhem. And if I had to choose, I would, if I had to choose only one color to print this book in, it would probably be red. But instead, it's going to be a full color extravaganza. And the humor will be in the action and in the absurd lengths that our characters go to try and survive this one hellacious night.
Well, that's good. At least it's not all blood and gore and everything like that.
There's a few movies. They are some classic kung fu movies of the 70s and 80s, which I'm using as guiding principles. And these are movies that are both horrors and comedies, which is a unique thing that kung fu movies can pull off uniquely. If anyone wants, this is some insider secrets. I'm telling you first, Kurt. But one of the movies that you should check out is called Mr. Vampire. And another one is called It's the Seven Brothers and One Sister versus Dracula. And that movie in particular is a fun one because that is actually a co-production between the Shaw brothers, who are famous for all the kung fu movies we've heard about, and Hammer horror films. Do you remember those Hammer horror Dracula movies? So it's a crossover between both of those movie production studios. So the Dracula that you're thinking is the Dracula that takes a trip to China for that kung fu action.
Well, now I know I have something to watch this weekend. This is great.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of laying the groundwork out to try and arrange watch-alongs with those people who join, the campaign over the month of October, so that we could all have a good time watching these crazy kung fu films.
That's a guilty pleasure because I used to watch kung fu films with my dad, Jackie Chan and Jet Li and things like that, back like the old 70s and 80s style kung fu films. And it's just, there's something about it, not just the action, the comedy, it's just everything involved with it. It's just entertaining. It's just good fun. And I can see that with what I've briefly been able to read with your particular book here. And I just can't wait to see more of it. So is this going to be just a one-off book, or are we going to see a series? Like, what's your ultimate goal for Undead Kungfu Ghost Killer?
My primary goal with issue one is to produce it in such a way that I can also bring it to like the local comic shops and really, kind of give a little bit of love back to the comic shops and have my comic there. And also to get that feather in the hat, right? My comic can be found in a local comic shop. But I'm treating this as an annual. So if people like it, I do have a much larger story that I can tell, right? Because this story plugs into the greater world of A Tiger's Tale, but it does so in a way where you don't have to read volume one or volume two of A Tiger's Tale to enjoy Undead Kungfu Ghost Killer. But if you do read volumes one and two, especially volume two of A Tiger's Tale, I could point out the specific pages that Undead Kungfu Ghost Killer kind of takes place in between.
Awesome. I love it. Well, we can't obviously have you on the show without talking about your Kickstarter campaign because you already hinted at it a few times. Even I said it at the beginning of the show. October 1st is when it's starting. What can we expect from this amazing series? I know you've hinted at it on social media, but let's get a rundown of what we can enjoy when we follow this particular campaign and support it.
Well, I'll be offering the book both as a digital edition and as a traditional comic floppy. I'm really excited because I have a variant cover artist who will be contributing an alternate cover. And it turns out that that cover artist is not only a comics pro, but he is a kung fu master. So I get to really keep those deep kung fu cuts in the project. I'll also have sketch variants available so that anyone who wants me to draw like a personalized yokai or yaoguai, I could do that on the cover so that they can have their own little, completely unique comic. And then from there, I'll offer a whole catch up kit that will include, a Tiger's Tail Volume 1 and 2. And most importantly, I'll be offering custom commissions so that if enterprising backer wants to see how they would look as a kung fu character, what I call wuxia warriors, then I could take their photo likeness and my decades of experience art directing kung fu masters from around the world, plus that massive photo library I have as a result, and I'll turn them into like the ultimate kung fu character that they can then have as a original work of art. They can get it printed on their shirts. I've had folks, get use that same likeness for their mugs and their notebooks and other fun swag. So I'm a big fan of very customized projects in my campaigns, and I think that's why Kickstarter calls me a backer favorite, because I really like to draw in my backers and make it part of a more intimate experience. It's not just a product they're getting; they're gonna have a whole, fun time along the way.
Well, it's good to have personalized content if you can create that type of content, and I'm glad that you can. And I've seen you do that with your other Kickstarter campaigns as well. So I love to see you continuing that process, and it's just something that people can say, "Hey, look, this is me." I just love that.
It's true. In past campaigns, I've had backers, I've included backers in the pages of the comic itself. And, I could be convinced to do something like that with Undead Kungfu Ghost Killer as well. It's haven't decided yet, but that's kind of part of what I like to reserve the campaign for, those kind of fun, interactive, artistic endeavors.
So obviously, social media is a huge component of promotion shows like this as well too. What are you doing this time around to keep engagement up when it comes to not only during the campaign but maybe after the campaign as well?
Well, I'll be spending October taking massive deep dives into the lore of Yao Guai and yokai, and I'll be posting some essays, some translations from historic texts, a few of which I'll be illustrating on the side, right? Because some of these creatures are so bizarre, like I just did the drawing of a face swapper who will steal your face and keep them pickled in a barrel, and then goes around wearing other people's faces. So I did an illustration of that just to kind of to have fun in a creepy sort of way. And so I'll be revealing that and like posting essays on a tigerstail.com, as well as on my Plugo profile on Blue Sky and my Plugo Arts profile on Instagram. So I'll be doing something every Wednesday that's just based on some of these creatures or some of the crazy kung fu horror comedy movies that I just mentioned earlier.
Did you have a eureka moment when you were creating either these characters or working on this particular series that just was like everything just kind of clicks?
I think the biggest eureka moment that I had was realizing that the work that I had done in world building for the Tiger's Tail graphic novel, like that was still fertile ground. And so that was something that I thought I had a Tiger's Tail Volume 1 and Volume 2, and that made a nice complete unit. And then maybe at some point in the future, I could come back and produce a dragon's tail or a monkey's tail or another really meticulously researched graphic novel. But then I realized, I would really like to just do a comic. Like I would like to have a comic out there, something pulpy, something that, that's floppy, staple, the whole thing, what we think of when we think of a comic. And so that's what led me to thinking of which character has the most potential to show up in that kind of serialized fashion where you can have one story, one adventure that's satisfying, and then you could wait a little while and then have another adventure that would be equally satisfying. And so that's when I realized that Undead Kungfu Ghost Killer kind of sits perfectly in that space, especially with its I don't know, its echoes. I'm kind of using Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as like a sifu for this project.
The fact that you've worked with Kung Fu Magazine now in an online presence is amazing to see, and I love, you know, learning about all the masters and everything I've seen off that website. Are you going to have any articles coming up about Undead Kung Fu Ghost Killer or anything along that line?
Well, I have been talking with Gene Ching, the publisher for Kung Fu Magazine, and we ended up going to San Diego Comic-Con together as a team, and that was a lot of fun. So he's already written his coverage of the event, but I have a pretty sizable piece that's gonna be published online, and it's gonna explore the we're calling it the anthropology of Kung Fu cinema, right? And it's a real deep dive. It's covering about 70, 80 years of cinematic history, examining some of the earliest fight scenes from the early 60s and just working its way through to present day, right up to John Wick, and just examining how, similar to how one martial arts style influences the evolution of another martial arts style, those that evolutionary quality also carries over to the cinema. And so we track how, the influence of samurai movies affected Bruce Lee, and then how Bruce Lee cinematography affected Jackie Chan, and how, John Wick is the inheritor of all of that. So we'll be publishing this pretty extensive article, and it'll have movie clips as well. We'll be publishing that right at the end of September, which will give me some lead time to try and take a stab at more of the connections of such characters as Zhong Kui with, let's say, the more popular franchise like K-pop Demon Hunter, because there's so much connective tissue that connects the mythology of all of those style of heroes and villains. I'm hoping to squeeze out some time over the course of my October campaign to write an article about that as well. We'll see. Wish me luck, Kurt.
Yeah, it's not like you're going to be busy or anything, especially with this campaign, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's always room to juggle one more axe in the mix. What's the worst that could happen?
Burnout. That's about it.
Well, that's only if these are flaming axes, which,
True.
I would be willing to consider as well.
Look, just don't juggle chainsaws and flaming axes, and I'm sure you'll survive October.
Yeah, well, what's the worst that can happen? I spend my afterlife in fulfillment. I'll
Look,
be in good company.
I could actually see Undead Kung Fu Ghost Killer as a feature film, to be honest, and I'd love to see like Wu-Tang Clan or something, like just produce it. Just I think that'd be interesting.
Oh, that would be, well, it's really interesting because Zhong Kuai is kind of surfacing. Like, there's a new video game that was announced that will be featuring him. It just seems like, there's a lot of room for more ghost hunters and monster hunters that need to surface. So I'm kind of excited to have my take on this project coming out at this moment right now, when we need some some heroes to fight back the darkness.
I hate to say this, Patrick, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. Time flies with you, and I just love having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Kurt, thank you. It's I have to do better in keeping in touch and giving you the lead time that you deserve so that we can really set time aside to have these talks, because there's nothing like it, Kurt.
For sure, and one of these days I got to get back out west. It's been far too long for me, and look, San Diego Comic-Con is on my bucket list eventually. Love to do a tour with you there if I ever get out that way.
Oh man, what an epic team up that would be.
For those that want to support this campaign as well as yourself, where can we find you? How can we support you? And anything else you'd like to promote?
Well, the main URL I want everyone to write down really quickly is ukgk.site, right? ukgk.site will take you directly to the campaign page for Undead Kungfu Ghost Killer, where, for just $5, I'll send out a one-page comic book postcard so that people can get something physical for the cost of a coffee. I update my primary artist website at lugoarts.com fairly regularly. I have a newsletter there where I send free comics directly into people's inboxes. So the stuff that I do on Kickstarter, I do occasionally, but every second Tuesday of the month, I'm sending comics for free to those people who have decided to subscribe to plugoarts.com. That's just that's where most of my work happens, and I'm so glad that we have a strong community around that little website.
Well, like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You'd, of course, find this interview on our YouTube channel, as well as 1,200 plus others, youtube.com/TGT Media. The podcast you can find at every podcast platform that you happen to download podcasts from. Just search Two Geeks Talking, that's TWO, and find this interview as well as Patrick's past interviews and whatever else you'd like to do. I've so many in the entertainment industry, you will not get bored, trust me. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.